Welcome, everyone. I have a slide presentation that's going to come up here. I guess I'll just have you guys advance it. First, I'd like to thank Congressman Pittenger and Lucas Rojas. I've had a great privilege to attend and participate in several of these events. The first thing, as someone who has put workshops together, it's a lot harder than it looks. And I'm just impressed how Congressman Pittenger really, it's not a skeleton crew, it's him and Lucas.
It's the Philippine people.
And the Philippine people, yeah, your hosts make a big difference. But I'm very grateful. You know, it reminds me of a quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right, the famous German theologian. He said, you know, there is meaning in every journey that is unknown to the traveler. And that is absolutely true for these events, Congressman. So thanks again. Now, yesterday, I really enjoyed John Strand's talk about Greenland because it reminded me that I'm playing chess and President Trump is playing I'm playing checkers and President Trump is playing three-dimensional chess. It's clear to me that the standard ways we look at the world. So what I want to do today is look at the North American oil and gas production platform and talk a little bit about the kind of trauma for those who study American energy dominance and the prospects of the future these tariffs had, and also how we're going to reconsider what's really happening here. So let's go to the first slide. Okay, so what you need to understand about the North American oil and gas production platform, even the energy platform, is that it is a seamless, highly integrated market in which crude oil and products move back and forth across both borders and then out to the world market. And in fact, the North American oil and gas production platform does not draw on world supplies. We are net exporters of petroleum and natural gas to the world market. And disrupting these flows can be quite harmful to the productivity and long-term efficiency. And so you can see here that crude oil comes up from Mexico, comes down from Canada. This just shows you import flows. But I'll show you in a minute another picture where you'll see that the net effect of this, maybe, if you think about U.S. refiners, they are tuned to very advanced technology and they process heavy crude. But the U.S. produces enormous volumes of light crude. So we take the heavy crude from Canada, process it, and then we ship our lighter crude farther out. Next slide. Okay. So this is a very interesting picture. Between 2010 and 2020, the United States alone provided 80% of the increment in world oil demand that occurred during that period. In other words, you can see the prices here in gallons, like it was up to $3.50 down to $2. But in the absence of America's ability and, its technology, the shale oil revolution, to produce these vast quantities of incremental oil production, and we were part of the growth in demand, the world price of oil and the price of gasoline would have been much higher. So that's a sort of tribute to American ingenuity and also a constitutional republic which has private property and states which don't necessarily have to do everything the federal government wants them to do. Next slide. So this is something I don't think a lot of us understand, but this shows you North America, Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. What has happened since 1990? And you see, these provinces, particularly the U.S., was completely written off as a prospective oil and gas producer. But over time, technology, private property in places like Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, resulted in the advancements of extraction technology, and the U.S. production began to accelerate. And today you can see, if you take North America as a whole, as an integrated production platform, we are now a net exporter to the world market. By the way, that's true for the whole Western Hemisphere now with Brazil. The Western Hemisphere is not a net draw on world oil supplies. It's a net contributor. Next slide. So this shows North America's contribution to global natural gas supply. And I'm going to talk a little more about this later this afternoon, because I think we have a great opportunity to take a lot of the ideas of the new administration and President Trump for Africa. By the way, this year is the first time the G20 meeting will be held in Africa. It will be held in South Africa in November. And within the Trump administration, there's a lot of folks thinking about, okay, how can we give Africa the opportunities that we are benefiting in North America, which is access to large quantities of affordable fossil fuels. So while this is not directly related to tariffs, it's clear to me that the tariff strategy, as the previous speaker pointed out, the tariff strategy is really a process to try to move the system in a way that's more, actually beneficial to both parties, to deal with the security threat. I don't think President Trump really looks at the tariffs and say, oh, this is really the answer. They're a tool for him to try to move the system into a more productive spot for both parties. Next slide. This shows U.S. net oil trade with the world. So it is true that we import a lot of heavy crude from Canada, but we also export a lot of petroleum products and a lot of light sweet crude to the world market. So it's really, when you're dealing with a large continental landmass, it's not really easily divided from our neighbors and the production system. So you'll find natural gas flows back and forth across the Canadian border. Natural gas from the U.S. flows to Mexico. In fact, 2 ports on the west coast of Mexico are being constructed now to produce LNG, which will be exported to the Pacific Rim. In other words, they will bypass the Panama Canal. Next slide. So you can see here what's happened in the U.S. We are now major gas seller to the world market net. And by the way, there's a lot of discussion about how the U.S. provided enormous gas supplies to Europe after the invasion by Vladimir Putin. But actually, what really happened? You can't turn the switch on LNG overnight. It takes 5, 7, maybe 10 years, $10 billion to build a new LNG export facility. And by the way, we have massive reserves of natural gas. I was at an event in Texas where a very large independent producer said, today in Texas, because we have a lot of what's called associated gas, and comes up the well bore with the oil, it's kind of associated, it's called associated gas. He can't do anything about it. He's looking for the oil, but he gets the oil in the gas. He said, gas has to go to negative $25 a million BTU before I'll stop producing the oil. In other words, now nearly 13 to 15% of U.S. natural gas supply is just because we're producing oil. And so we need to find outlets for that gas. I think it's an enormous opportunity for Asia. And I think that's something the administration is going to be, irrespective of what we're doing now. I see these tariffs more as a sort of short-term leverage strategy and not a long-term strategy by the administration. Next slide. Okay, so I think that's, we're going to talk a little bit more about this afternoon. So what I wanted to say is that the way to think about the energy prospects in the U.S. and actually the emergence of President Trump for a second term is that he is not stuck in a sort of traditional paradigm of net zero. He's not stuck in any sort of paradigm that doesn't make sense to him. And so I do think the U.S. is an opportunity, and particularly in the Philippines, where, by the way, the Philippines is one of the few Asian markets on the power sector really operates principally on market forces. They don't subsidize power in the Philippines. This is an enormous opportunity for development of new LNG supplies to enhance energy security throughout the Philippines. So within that context, I don't see the near-term trade maneuver, trade and the tariffs as disrupted to the long-term energy supplies and availability to the Asian market. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lou.